Yo, that trailer was hype as hell. We saw so much in 3 minutes of this Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree gameplay reveal. Let's break down 5 details that you may have missed, plus one speculation-y thing at the end. Let's go! Let me know what I've missed in the comments down below. I'm going to have a ton of Elden Ring DLC content coming. I just wanted to get this video out really quick to show some things that you may have missed and just like talk about the initial things that we saw. And I apologize for my voice. It is 3 a.m. right now. I have had no sleep, and that's just what happens when they drop these trailers at 2 a.m. my time. All right. So very quickly in the trailer, we see the lands between, but they aren't actually the lands between that we know. This new land is actually called the Lands of Shadow. Now, this is mentioned on the official Bandai Namco website, where they say that as a fall from grace, the Land of Shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot. The land purged in an unsung battle set ablaze by Mezma's flame, more on Mezma later. It was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage of all things golden, and now Miquella awaits to return of his promised lord. So this new land, based on just what we have seen briefly, looks a lot bigger than what I was expecting. Like, we see multiple shots of different castles and inside areas, which one can assume are sort of those like general dungeons that we would expect from the original base game. It is also mentioned on their website that players can seamlessly travel back and forth between the vast maps of the Lands of Shadow and the lands between. So assumably once you've started the DLC and you've sort of got your first sight of grace, then you'll actually be able to then travel back and forth. Though it may not even be called Sight of Grace, considering they fall from grace is a key theme of the overall DLC and seemingly the trailer as well. But in a lot of these shots as well, like in the interiors and exteriors, we see a bunch of different new locations. One that really stands out to me is this one of this girl person like sleeping. Is this like a sleep swamp? We've had all sorts of swamps already in Elden Ring. Are we now getting like a legit sleep swamp? That's kind of hilarious. But now it's also interesting how we actually start this DLC. And I think it's all but confirmed that you start by touching Miquella's hand in the cocoon after the Moog boss fight. So very early in the trailer and throughout as well, we see imagery of Miquella's hand in the cocoon and like their arm coming out. Milena also says, "Come now, touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of shadow." So obviously the Lands of Shadow is as we know that it's called, but specifically mentions touching the withered arm, which is actually how we seemingly travel there. So that's essentially confirmed that you'll have to fight Moog and actually beat him, and then you'll be able to go to the DLC by touching Miquella's arm and transporting it to the worlds. Now, what's really interesting here as well is just after that, Milena says, "I will not be far behind. May we meet again." So it seems like she's not joining us for this DLC, at least initially, which is quite interesting. I'm wondering what the reason for that is. You know, there is obviously certain endings of the game where Milena does actually leave you, but I'm interested to see why that is, that they don't actually come with you. Is that something to do with the, like, because it's a dream, like Miquella's dream or something, and they can't enter it, and maybe they have to enter a different way? Interested to know. I just thought that was an interesting detail to point out, that seemingly they're not actually joining us. Now, the big one that we obviously see a lot of throughout this is new enemy types. Not only just standard enemies, but bosses as well. It is a little hard to distinguish the difference between an enemy and a boss, right? Some of them are very clear, like they just sort of look like people that you can sort of fight as well, like to open it out in the open world and everything. And then there's things like the giant hippo that has this cool incantation sort of effect that, you know, is that a boss? Is that just an enemy? We honestly don't know. But, you know, there's also this guy that pulls the spike out of his head, which is definitely a boss by the looks. It's also shown earlier in the trailer that there is a portrait of him seemingly as, you know, like a household figure, the leader of some household, and then we seemingly fight them much later. I'm curious to know if these two figures that are shown in this portrait and then this individual that we fight later are the parents of Mezma, who is the, I don't want to say big bad, because we don't 100% know. Like, it would be very FromSoft to present this character as being like the big bad and then like Jebaitas by them not actually being. But Mezma the Impaler is their name. We know that from the collector's edition, which looks absolutely incredible. I can't wait to hopefully get my hands on one of those. But the reason I bring that up is that during the trailer that Mezma actually mentions mother, like refers to that mother character. So I'm curious to know who that is. We also see like the Fire Giant 2.0, as well as a bunch of just like new standard enemies that we'll be fighting as we explore the Lands of Shadow. I think one of the best things that comes out of having new enemies is new weapons. Like a lot of the new enemies, we see them using new weapons that we haven't actually seen before in Elden Ring. Like a good example of that would be this Black Knight with this like machine gun crossbow thing, and then seemingly some sort of black greatsword on his back. It does look very similar to the Berserk sword from Elden Ring, but I just think it is a different weapon, even though it does look similar. Obviously, Mesmer will be hopefully getting their like boss armor and boss weapon. We also see new scimitars from this enemy that sort of look like potentially blood or bleed scimitars, maybe. My absolute favorite looking new weapon is this lance that has some sort of lightning ash of war on it that this mounted enemy uses. I really hope we can get this lance. That looks really cool. And then during the sequence where we see the player fighting Mesmer, they are using a twin blade, which I'm not sure if that twin blade is new or if it looks like the Gargoyle's twin blade. I think that is the one that I'm thinking of. But the shield they have is definitely new. We haven't seen that shield before, and it does seem like for a brief moment there is some sort of shield ash of war that we haven't seen before, except they get knocked out of the animation, which is, classic Elden Ring as you try and like get your ash of wars off in boss fights. But it has also obviously been confirmed as well that we won't just be getting new weapons, we will be getting new equipment, weapon skills, so ash of wars, and magic being incantations. We briefly see one incantation that is seemingly some sort of Saint Trina's like sleep AoE, like you can sort of see the player trigger this effect and then the characters briefly go into like that sleep animation. So I would fully expect to see sort of Miquella themed incantations, and I think Faith players are definitely going to be eating good from everything that we've seen in this trailer. It looks like a lot of Faith heavy things, but maybe that's just because they're keeping a lot of the intelligence heavy things to themselves at this point. But there is a bunch of new Ash of Wars shown as well. Like we see the player do this interesting sort of double tab Ash of War with a dual scimitars and then sort of a quick step and then back attack, which looks really interesting. And then after that, we see some player throwing knives in sort of a poise break effect. After they throw the knives, they break the poise of that enemy. Potentially my favorite is like the kick Ash of War that we see from like the very Bloodborne inspired armor player character that they're wearing. And then immediately after that, the player throws a massive like jar pot, which maybe that's a spell, maybe that's just a new piece of equipment that you can use. I'm curious to see that. And then there is this like blink and you'll miss it moment where I'm curious to know if this is the player using some sort of new like misbegotten spell that you get maybe from that boss that we see a little bit earlier, or if this is like an enemy type where you see like it reminds me a lot of like the dragon spells that you sort of like encompass that dragon and like make that roar effect. But I'm curious if this is something or if this is like an enemy type or what this is here. But the one thing that we obviously know from the amount of different variations we saw in this trailer is that there'll be plenty of new weapons and spells and Ash of Wars to play around with, and I'll obviously have a ton of builds coming out for all of that good stuff once we know more. The one thing that I wanted to sort of speculate on at the end here is Mesmer the Impaler. And who is Mesmer right now? The armor that they're wearing in these shots are very like Drake Blood inspired. Like it reminds me a lot of that armor set. It's also very Rickard, having like the snake running around through them, which is quite interesting. The reference to Mother is also an interesting point to bring up, as I mentioned earlier. I'm very curious to know who this is. Now, obviously we're going to have to wait until the DLC comes out, but just for some wild speculation, I wonder if this is actually Miquella. Now, we are sort of entering Miquella's dream, and maybe this isn't a version of Miquella, like the way that Miquella sees themselves, as being like mesmerizing people, Mesmer, that sort of connection with the name. And Mesmer here is sort of like a spiritual bodyguard to Miquella that we have to defeat to actually like talk to Miquella or could progress the story, obviously. But I'm very interested to see if that is the case, especially the reference to Mother. Like maybe that is just straight up Marika that's sort of referring to, because this is Miquella, or maybe this is some sort of weird Rickard offspring or something. Like, I don't know. I'm really interested to see your guys' thoughts in the comments down below, but please let me know there. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.